Welcome to another episode of Citizen Senior. My name is Steve Louie.
Hello, my name is Margaret Louie. Please note, we are not saying emotions are bad. We are not saying the amygdala is bad. We are saying the whole brain is good. Emotions, amygdala, works with the rest of the brain creatively. Loving kindness and compassion are boosted by both reason and emotions. Together, they are our moral compass. This episode, Emotional Intelligence, EQ, and Science. Discussions for the future, EQ and loving kindness and compassion. Because everyone is stressed, also altered traits, and externalizing your prefrontal cortex. This episode deals mainly with emotional processing of information in the brain and its implications for change, development, and improvement. There are certain myths about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, particularly insofar as women are concerned.
One myth is that everyone grows out of it from childhood. Symptoms of ADHD can last a lifetime. And, as we shall see in the case of senior women, a life of frustration, self-blame, lack of self-confidence, and a feeling of not having met one's true potential is a common thread that doesn't have to persist, because the combination of MBSR with cognitive behavioral therapy can help build new habits of living.
So, let's dive right in and look at the brain, where it all begins.
Quantum breakthrough, when stimulated by UV light and other electromagnetic fields, tryptophan amino acid networks in the microtubular cytoskeleton of neural networks emit fluorescent light, helping to distinguish 4 to 100 micrometer to nanometer strands in diagnostic imaging.
Don't worry about defining every single term you run across. For the time being, let's just say that the old methods of looking at the brain with slides, microscopes, and even x-rays and CAT scans couldn't zoom in close enough to see structures deep inside the brain.
Furthermore, in order to understand the brain in action, older techniques would have required physicians and researchers to harm the very tissue they were trying to understand in action. The brain, after all, is a gelatinous material inside a bag of salt water, enclosed by a skull, and fed by blood pumped from the heart.
Recent quantum techniques cause neurons to glow, standing out brightly from darker backgrounds. Even more importantly, chemical electrical signals can be seen traversing the neuronal strands.
Add to that techniques of brain imaging that permit researchers to compare the brain at rest, the brain during daydreaming, versus the brain engaged in various tasks requiring focused attention.
Right now, these modern techniques are too expensive to be used in common practice, but the future holds promise for improvements over time.
Understanding ADHD neuroscience. Neuroscience follows the scientific method. Bradford Hill criteria is an established modern protocol for determining the reliability of treatment of disorders with a clear causal basis. While heavily criticized recently, Bradford Hill criteria is still a foundational protocol. Dopamine and neurotransmitter. Altered dopamine regulation affects neurotransmitter function in individuals with ADHD, impacting cognitive processes and behavior. Impact on executive function. These neurological differences influence attention, executive function, and impulse control in daily life. Importance of neuroscience technologies. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. Magnetic electroencephalography, MEG. Longitudinal studies such as the Berkeley Schoolgirl Study. MBSR dose-dependent altered trait analysis, and other research is providing evidence of benefit. We're going to flat out tell you that we trust evidence-based research performed according to the scientific method that has been reviewed by experts and verified by clinical practice.
We recommend that you evaluate claims that you might see in social media sites with a skeptical eye, including our own claims. One of being a responsible consumer of medical information is to be aware that there will always be charlatans.
Ask a physician or your insurance provider if treatments are provided and covered by your healthcare treatment. If a physician or your insurance provider won't cover the cost of care made in social media claim, it's a pretty good bet you're being misinformed.
While novel new medications and treatments do emerge from trustworthy institutions all the time, you can tell whether or not a research claim is real by the number of subjects supposedly claimed. That is, research involves test subjects who may be given the real treatment or drug while another group is treated conventionally. Scientists publish their data in mainstream journals.
Emotional problem solving. The amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. The amygdala allows for rapid, albeit less detailed processing of sensory information, especially related to potential threats. This way, and this pathway can trigger responses in as little as 50 to 74 milliseconds, according to a Nature neuroscience study. A millisecond is 1/1000th of a second. Thus, the amygdala can trigger in 50 to 74 thousandths of a second. A person can unconsciously respond to a threat. Conscious awareness, on the other hand, indicate that it takes approximately 200 to 280 milliseconds for a signal to reach conscious awareness after a stimulus is received. This process involves the brain integrating information and distributing it across different areas in decision-making and action selection. Impact on conscious response. Rational, conscious thought, known as the executive function of the brain, takes up to 4 times longer to happen as compared to an emotional reaction.
One of the realities of science is that our knowledge of the brain is constantly evolving, and with each evolution, improvements in medicine and medical care can come about. These schematics are very gross approximations of what actually happens in the brain. Use them to help you grasp how your own brain works.
The person is left-facing, and we're seeing the left side of the brain, as well as some deeply embedded structures that are in color. Note that the emotional center of the brain is located along a line directly to the right of the eyes, being small, greenish, almond-shaped structures just above the olfactory tract. Amygdala is also surrounded by short-term memory structures.
Of interest, near the front of the brain is the prefrontal cortex, where the brain's decision-making neurons, synapses, and structures permit rational thinking rather than emotional. There is a possibility, though, that if something seen is known to be dangerous, our brain derails the normal processing of information in favor of a near instantaneous response that can happen so quickly we're not even consciously aware of our own actions.
Emotional problem solving. Here, To the left of the person, I've drawn a picture of a spider. The eyes focus on something fearful. In 50 thousandths of a second, the images pass from the eyes to the nerves to two almond-shaped structures called the amygdala. Here, pictured behind the image of the spider in the brain. Unconscious awareness. The spider image passes from the amygdala normally next to the optical cortex of the brain near the back of the skull. However, the amygdala can bypass this process if fight or flight is necessary. If a spider was scary to you, you would want to jump out of the way. You wouldn't want to think about it. Unconsciously, we may have memories, fearful objects in memory areas that bypass regular response and instead triggers an emotional hijack. This is an important concept, an emotional hijack, because you're not conscious of it, but it leads to avoidance, anger, fear, and other growing emotional responses, or in the case of a positive response. If it wasn't a spider, let's say someone that you love a great deal. For example, I love my wife. It can trigger very quickly joy, happiness, pleasure, and a desire for closeness. Here, the spider is deemed scary, and the amygdala tells the person to scream, yell, or jump out of the way of the threat.
The left-facing person suddenly sees a spider that he or she is afraid of in real life. Light travels very quickly through the eyes and into the retina, which then transmits the signal along the optic nerve to its first neural stop, the amygdala.
There are two amygdalae, one in each half of the brain. Your brain is divided up into two hemispheres. The amygdala means little almonds in Latin. These are the emotional centers of the brain. We use the term emotional hijack to describe the ADHD phenomena of the amygdala taking control of the signal unconsciously and routing the signal to either the motor area of the brain, which means you jump out of the way of the spider, or you lash out with your newspaper before even being consciously aware of what's happening.
Ordinarily, the visual signal proceeds directly to the rear of the head, where it intersects with the optical cortex tissue. That creates an image of what you're seeing. Reality is that we never directly see anything without the brain reporting the signal to other parts of the brain, as we shall see.
Our interpretation of reality is also shaped by our cultural experiences. A person who has never seen a Da Vinci-style painting might only see blobs of color. Someone who's blind might see objects by touch or sound, but these are still reported to the visual areas of the brain. Okay, look closely at the picture, because now you can see that the line going through from the eyes, from the experience of the reality outside, going into the eyes, stopping at the amygdala, going to the optical cortex, is now bouncing back and going to the thalamus. This is all part of emotional problem solving. The thalamus is the routing station of the brain. In 70 thousandths of a second, the image passes from the amygdala to the thalamus. If we're not sure the spider is a threat, we recall that spiders eat bugs, and since it isn't a poisonous spider, we wonder what we should do next. Conscious awareness then becomes involved. After 200 thousandths of a second, because the signal is now being transferred from the thalamus to many other parts of the brain, including the amygdala once again. In 200 thousandths of a second, we've checked to see if the spider is a black widow or brown recluse or some other poisonous spider, and we begin thinking of how to move the spider to a different location. Now, what I have asked Margie to do is that whenever she is emotionally hijacked, to snap the rubber band on her wrist. Having been trained in MBSR and CBT, We use the rubber band to prevent ourselves from reacting purely amygdala. Whole brain processing. Are we brave enough to trap the spider? Do we need help? Should we leave it alone? What to do? The visual signal of the spider has now been routed to a relay area of the brain called the thalamus, which is richly supplied with nervous connections to different parts of the brain, and it's also supplied with numerous blood vessels.
A person who has ADHD may never send the visual signal to this important relay station of the brain, and this poses significant problems for those of us with ADHD. In imaging done by researchers, it may be obvious that signals isolated to around the amygdala are typical of women with ADHD.
The relay station signal of the thalamus looks in brain scans like an explosion of signals traveling back and forth. One area is essential to improving your life. That is, your brain needs to send that signal to the very front of the head, to the brain area called the prefrontal cortex, for rational, mature, and appropriate decisions to be made about that spider if needed at all.
The key is healing. This is the process, is to get the brain to stop reacting so quickly and excessively emotionally to the sight of a spider. I wear a rubber band around my wrist that I snap to shake me out of the amygdala stage and think.
Okay, look closely at the picture because now you can see that the line going through from the eyes, from the experience of the reality outside, going into the eyes, stopping at the amygdala, going to the optical cortex, is now bouncing back and going to the thalamus. This is all part of emotional problem solving. The thalamus is the routing station of the brain. In 70 thousandths of a second, the image passes from the amygdala to the thalamus. If we're not sure the spider is a threat, we recall that spiders eat bugs, and since it isn't a poisonous spider, we wonder what we should do next. Conscious awareness then becomes involved. After 200 thousandths of a second, because the signal is now being transferred from the thalamus to many other parts of the brain, including the amygdala once again. In 200 thousandths of a second, we've checked to see if the spider is a black widow or brown recluse or some other poisonous spider, and we begin thinking of how to move the spider to a different location. Now, what I have asked Margie to do is that whenever she is emotionally hijacked, to snap the rubber band on her wrist. Having been trained in MBSR and CBT, we use the rubber band to prevent ourselves from reacting purely amygdala. Whole brain processing. Are we brave enough to trap the spider? Do we need help? Should we leave it alone? What to do? The visual signal of the spider has now been routed to a relay area of the brain called the thalamus, which is richly supplied with nervous connections to different parts of the brain, and it's also supplied with numerous blood vessels.
A person who has ADHD may never send the visual signal to this important relay station of the brain, and this poses significant problems for those of us with ADHD. In imaging done by researchers, it may be obvious that signals isolated to around the amygdala are typical of women with ADHD.
The relay station signal of the thalamus looks in brain scans like an explosion of signals traveling back and forth. One area is essential to improving your life. That is, your brain needs to send that signal to the very front of the head, to the brain area called the prefrontal cortex, for rational, mature, and appropriate decisions to be made about that spider if needed at all.
The key is healing. This is the process, is to get the brain to stop reacting so quickly and excessively emotionally to the sight of a spider. I wear a rubber band around my wrist that I snap to shake me out of the amygdala stage and think. Revolutions in neuroscience, microtubules, and quantum waves. We will not be discussing the amazing overlap between U of A anesthesiology Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose, an English mathematician and mathematical physicist, philosophy of science, and Nobel laureate in physics. He is Emeritus Roose Ball Professor of Mathematics at the University of Oxford, an Emeritus Fellow of Wadham College, etc. Importance of neuroscience technologies. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, MRIs, magnetic electroencephalopathy, MEG, longitudinal studies such as the Berkeley School Girl Study, MBSR, dose-dependent altered traits analysis, and other research is providing evidence of benefit.
So what you're looking at is a picture on the left of microtubules. And so what Stuart Hameroff was suggesting when I first met him at the University of Arizona was that there were quantum effects occurring in these microtubules which are present throughout living biology, especially in the human brain. The scanned picture on the left is a page from Stuart's book that I acquired after interviewing him for an article. If there is sufficient interest, we'll do another segment, and who knows, perhaps we'll do an interview. Factually speaking, when I first met Dr. Hameroff at the University of Arizona in the early 1990s, not as much was known about quantum effects in the brain as has been demonstrated by multiple thinkers as we now know. Even physicist YouTube influencer Sabina Hassenfelder and the Arizona Public Media television producers jumped on the quantum brain background with episodes. After my interview with Dr. Hameroff, I had penned a copy of his book, Ultimate Computing, wherein he first describes microtubules he realized were like nanometer-sized polymer tubes forming all sorts of cytoskeletal functions throughout the human body. The fact that these tubes were dipoles suggested that they might be organic transistors that partner with brain neurons to perform as an integrated biological quantum computer in a wet and noisy housing with salt water in a skull garage. Roger Penrose believed it was a mechanism for quantum wave collapse in the novel new idea. What am I saying? Well, he's saying that perhaps the brain is much more than what we contain in our skulls. These nanotubules could act as transistors or partners to the brain that we have in our skull, and so maybe our neural system is actually much more than we've ever thought it was. The amazing human brain. The central control center of our body, the brain, is the body's primary control center, processing information and coordinating physical and mental actions. There are billions of neurons. This number is exponentially multiplied by trillions of synaptic connections that transfer electrical to biochemical messages along neural pathways. The synapses are like little fingers that project from the neurons to connect to other neurons. Recognizing emotional intelligence in ADHD, We now have a beginner's description of the challenge of taming the emotional amygdala in ADHD. Can senior women easily learn how to regulate their emotions, making their feelings more intelligent? Is there knowledge already in the world that would help us and teach us how to achieve emotional intelligence rather than just intelligence? Let me emphasize the point that we are not saying emotions are wrong. I've seen many people who wanted to make healthcare their future occupation only to discover that they didn't possess the organizational skills and knowledge base to succeed at the job. Even some physicians, in my experience, might be excellent at diagnosing patient problems and yet lack the interpersonal skills necessary to successfully work with a team of professionals in a highly teamwork-dependent environment.
We are saying that, like many chronic disorders, we can learn our way to a better mind and body, because ADHD is not just a disorder of the mind. When you make bad decisions about thinking, you're also probably making bad decisions about your body, relationships, workplace situations, and how to plan a better life.
In my time in the Navy, where I learned many of the skills necessary to lead a team of people, I ran across a book written by General Gordon Sullivan, and this phrase stuck in my mind: hope is not a method.
Folks, science is a method. Davidson, Goleman, and Kabat-Zinn. The tricycle. Richard Davidson, on the left, American psychologist, research neuroscientist, Center for Healthy Minds. Daniel Goleman, in the middle, American psychologist, author of Emotional Intelligence and Altered Traits. And John Kabat-Zinn, on the right, American professor of medicine, author Full Catastrophe Life, MBSR, and Stress Reduction Clinic, University of Massachusetts. Receiving the admonition from the Dalai Lama to bring to bear all the tools of the scientific method to help the world understand the importance, relevance of meditation to healing the mind and body, and to translate the ancient methods of generations of students of mindfulness, each of these men have contributed mightily to the fulfillment of that promise.
The understanding of their work has brought together many other scientists, social media influencers, systems of healthcare such as the Veterans Administration, corporate organizations, and media personalities and organizations into the realm of spreading and giving this gift to humanity.
We're not trying to be senior citizen influencers, so to prove that to you, we're asking you to go away and read some stuff before you come back to rejoin us. For those of you who find value, Citizen Senior, please click on the like button below.
Why? Because all the answers you wish to find are within you now. Read a little and find that out for yourself. We're pleased that you stuck with us this far. The Dalai Lama, from tradition to science. The Dalai Lama and Daniel Goleman together. Lest you think this is about religion, the photo to the left is the Dalai Lama encouraging Western scientists to vigorously subject the practice of mindfulness to rigorous scientific examination using the scientific method with full integrity. The Dalai Lama is the head of a school. The Gelag school of Tibetan Buddhism focuses more on compassion and loving kindness than scholarly recitation of ancient documents. Recognizing emotional intelligence in ADHD, Goleman was one of the pioneers of the movement to recognize emotional intelligence as a legitimate partner to intellectual intelligence. The Pentagon Veterans Hospital. Major corporations have realized that in order for teams to work compatibly together, both emotional and intellectual talent needs to be recognized. Could it be that EQ, or emotional intelligence, plays a part of calming the ADHD mind? Do we need brains that work together?
Stephen Scanetti, a reporter for a French paper, once wrote, "When I wanted to meet the Dalai Lama back in 1980, I went to his door in Dharamsala and I knocked. Sure, his servant said, tomorrow afternoon okay?" That, of course, was before he became an international superstar.
It wasn't so much his answers as his attitude that soothed my worries. He made it clear that beliefs were a personal matter and that perhaps I didn't need to take the ancient tradition of Buddhist scholarship too seriously. After all, as he never tires of saying, this is my simple religion. There is no need for temples, no need for complicated philosophy. Our brain, our heart, is our temple. The philosophy is kindness.
In contrast to previously reclusive leaders of the Tibetan tradition, the Dalai Lama disclaims any special power to heal. Instead, he acknowledges his human frailties and discomforts while remaining intellectually open, deeply pleasant, thoughtful, and a wholesome practitioner of meditation and loving kindness.
The practice itself consists of bringing attention back again and again to the position of being an observer of our own thoughts rather than a victim of our emotions, while evoking a compassion for others and especially ourselves. Immanuel Kant. Kant believed that reason is the source of morality, and that aesthetic rises from a faculty of disinterested judgment. Kant's religious views were deeply connected to his moral therapy. As a young man, I could not understand why Kant was important. Now, in a world governed by emotional marketing that focuses solely on your amygdala, I know that in the opening of the prefrontal cortex, MBSR returns our minds to the ability to make moral and ethical choices of loving kindness and compassion.
A world that is governed by marketing, stimulating the amygdala of the brain as much as possible. Everything, news, products, political ideology of all types, social media, all promising instant gratification, be on the winning side. Everything becomes transitional and relative. We become programmed by media and commercials to become addicted not only to substances, but messages and ideology as well. Not the basis of morality, ethics, and/or compassion and loving kindness.
I was confused as a youngster as to how Kant could say that morality issued from morality and ethics. Now, I realize that morality and ethics can never arise from what Noam Chomsky describes as strong qualities, stripped of moral content, but full of emotive power, in a society where moral coherence has disintegrated.
ADHD and the emotional chaos, moral relativism, and transactional basis of living today have similar roots in the disintegration of social order founded upon a diversity of opinion and the practice of civil discourse.
Societies have been the primary victims of this decay. Buddhism refers to this as suffering, and the route to peace is not to convince others through marketable persuasion, but the adoption of personal responsibility of the self. I once took a course that debated whether the mind and body were separate things. Perhaps they are separate as long as we don't take time to watch ourselves quietly and deeply. Let our peace and calm The insular cortex is located deep within the lateral depression of the brain. If you were to pull the temporal lobe and bring it downward, then we could see an overview of insular functions. The insula, often referred to as the hidden island of the brain, is involved in a wide range of physical, physiological, and psychological processes. Here are some of the key functions. Emotional processing. The insula is deeper in the brain than the amygdala, but the insula is integral to recognizing and responding to emotions, both in ourselves and others. It helps facilitate empathy and social interactions, acting as an emotional hub that integrates sensory and emotional information. Pain perception. This region is crucial for processing both the sensory and emotional aspects of pain. It helps explain why our experiences of pain can be influenced by our emotional state, making it a significant area of interest in pain management. The insula is involved in interoception, which is the awareness of internal bodily states, such as heart rate, hunger, thirst. This function is essential for maintaining homeostasis and responding to needs, bodily needs. And in fact, when you talk to ADHD people at first, they may not be aware that they have any sort of physiological response to emotional reactions. Language and speech production. The insula contributes to the motor aspects of speech and articulation, playing a role in language processing.
If we refer back to our example of seeing a scary spider, when the prefrontal cortex is involved, such as during meditation, signals proceed backwards to the amygdala and deep within the brain to an area known as the insula.
Emotional processing systems within the insula are integral to recognizing and responding to our emotions to facilitate empathy, both for ourselves and others. It's interesting to note that the term recognize literally means to see again. Perhaps we need to see our emotions a second time in order to provide the executive functions of the prefrontal cortex an opportunity to more clearly see what we are seeing emotionally in a different light.
Thus, the insula may contribute to the PFC's inhibitory functions in reacting to external events as being perhaps not as threatening as we initially felt, before allowing all of our brain to respond.
While fear might render us speechless, the insula may permit us to vocalize what we are feeling, rather than being unconsciously mute or having the capability of naming what we're feeling emotionally, physically, and thoughtfully. That's why a mob doesn't think. It's really just reacting according to its amygdala. You have to train yourself to become empathic and compassionate to others. Daniel Goleman introduces emotional intelligence, the big think. When I first met Margaret for the first time, I was attracted to the beautiful timbre of her voice. Then I learned she was a very kind and caring person who is ever ready to help others. I thought of Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, as a way of describing Margaret to myself and others. After being a nurse for over 40 years, I found it easier and easier to spot those who have a talent with meeting people, putting them at ease, and being unpretentious. Having ADHD is only one facet of a person. There are many more things to being a human being than just being logico-deductive. Joseph Nguyen. I think each generation wants a voice to represent it, and that's exactly what Joseph Nguyen does. This young man does it in such a way that everyone else who practices mindfulness meditation. We first have to come to terms with our own mind, an instrument of such awesome power that it respects the randomness of the universe with an unending voice that beguiles us without meaning. What that means is that we just constantly have thoughts rolling through our heads, thinking that we control them, but really, they're random. Only by watching the flow of our own mind's river of thought, dreams, desires, fears, and expectations can we find ourselves becoming our own dispassionate observer, learning like Mark Twain did as a riverboat captain, to learn from our own internal environment, a course to our own sanity. John Kabat-Zinn. For those of you who are younger, perhaps you've never seen the movie Zorba the Creek with Anthony Quinn. Zorba dances in the same way that Buddha realizes sometimes it's better to be kind than to be right. We do not need an intelligent mind that speaks, but a patient heart that listens, because only then can we rejoice in life. This is true happiness, to have no ambition and to work like a horse as if you had every ambition, to live far from men, not to need them and yet to love them, to have the stars above, the land to your left and the sea to your right, and to realize of a sudden that in your heart life has accomplished its final miracle. It has become a fairy tale. Nicholas Katsakis, Zorba the Greek. Full catastrophe living is named that, with a lot of controversy, I might add. John Kabat-Zinn was told by his publisher that this book would never sell if it was called Full Catastrophe Living. But yet, isn't this how we describe most of our lives? Richard Davidson. Dr. Richard Davidson, a researcher at the University of Wisconsin, writes, your grades in school, your scores on the SAT means less for life. Success than your capacity to cooperate, your ability to regulate your emotions, your capacity to delay your gratification, and your capacity to focus your attention. Memory is deceptive because it is colored by today's events. Meditation gives you the wherewithal to pause. Observe how easily the mind can exaggerate the severity of a setback, risk getting drawn into the abyss. In meditation, you experience time slowing down because you can notice more things per discrete moment, and you're more open. The word meditation in Sanskrit comes from the word familiarization, as in familiarization with one's own mind. Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin is one of the most critical scientific observers of meditation as a scientific phenomena. He is the one, those of you who may have seen his picture, or actually the picture of the Dalai Lama with all the electrodes in his head in Life magazine all those past years ago. He is the one who did that, who brought Buddhist monks to the United States, to the University of Wisconsin, to meditate in his fMRI machines. George Sheehan, the late Dr. George Sheehan. When I first began running long distances in the world, I recognized it as meditation immediately. In moments of physical effort, my body somehow became integrated into my thoughts and perceptions. Unlike other people, I began running as an adult because of cardiologist George Sheehan's philosophical, poetic, and prosaic description of discovering the self and process. Running footsteps disappeared as I finally joined the entirety of existence effortlessly, as if I could shed my skin and simply fly through the wind, rain, sun, and dark just because I could. And I was doing this by running uphill in the early morning before going to work at Oakland Naval Hospital. I discovered that there were others making the journey too, and like the character Forrest Gump, it was nice to know that we could fail at everything, but succeed just in being. and running.
Learn, if you can, and return. For the sake of love, we continue.
If you decide to return and join us, then Margaret and I will be pleased to welcome you to Small Bears and Company. Citizen Senior is just beginning. Here comes the ad. If you like what we're doing, please click the like button below. It matters.